In October of 2022, I finally decided to play Undertale. After 7 years of knowing about its existence in the world, I finally decided to give it a shot and see what's so great about this game. My original plan for YouTube was just to play the neutral route, and if I wanted to later, play the pacifist and genocide routes on my own time. Then this happened. What do I think? I'll tell you what I think, Vaughan XV from the past. This game was so good, I decided to play the pacifist route for YouTube after all. That experience was even more mind-blowing than the previous, to say the least. But, of course, if I was going to put pacifist on the internet, I couldn't leave genocide out as well. Fortunately, I still had a while before I had to worry about that. With the genocide route, I was the least mentally prepared for, since I had no idea how the game would actually turn out. Unlike with pacifist, which is more or less the same as neutral up until the end. Granted, when I played neutral, I wasn't prepared for that either, but it was more of a light-hearted, not so serious route that I didn't really have to worry about my outcome too much. However, I did have one piece of information to go by that told me how to start. I don't want to dive too far into the context as to how I did find out, as I will be leaving that for a future video discussing all my thought processes for each route of the game. But what I found out that I had to do was walk around in the ruins, kill 20 or so enemies until I saw the text, but nobody came. And I had to do this before I left the ruins, because otherwise then I wouldn't be doing genocide. So be it, I started the genocide route, and did what I had to do, and then this happened. There we go. Here we go. Oh my gosh, that took me off guard. That took me off, oh my god. Yeah, this route of the game was definitely going to be something, alright. The rest of the ruins was about the same compared to the previous two routes, save for some disturbing pieces of text. Needless to say, I proceeded to fight Toriel. For the Toriel fight, since I had already killed her in neutral, which I will be talking about in the future, I decided I have to take things one step further and perform the unfathomable betrayal kill. As it turns out, when you are on the genocide route, Toriel goes down in one hit no matter what you do. However, the special dialogue from waiting for the very last moment to strike was worth it to see, in all of its horror. I know the normal genocide dialogue isn't much better to witness, but it still feels extremely messed up. But aside from the sight of, that was far from the most important thing that happened in the ruins. That award would go to our succeeding interaction with Flowey, where he says to us, "You're Kara, right?" Or in my case, this. And this here is a very important distinction to make. In any other route of the game, before you leave the ruins, Flowey never addresses you by this name, which makes sense, as we find out in the end of Pacifist that we were actually playing as Frisk the whole time, not the name we gave our human at the very start. But that isn't the case this time around. However, I won't be delving that far in Undertale's lore right now. Point is, here, Flowey recognizes you as the first fallen human, Kara, which is an important detail coming up in a moment. Up to this point, everything in the Genocide route of Undertale is shaping up to be what I had hoped from it, where neutral and pacifists were quite similar to each other, but despite having different premises. This route was way different, with a lot of new stuff going for it. I was expecting the rest of the game to go similarly, almost like there was a brand new game ahead of me. Unfortunately, Toby Fox would never let that happen. Mass murder isn't supposed to be rewarding. It's supposed to be wrong, and as such, it should feel wrong. After Snowden, and our first interaction with Sans and Papyrus, and this is where my first feeling of disappointment set in. Alright, here's the thing about neutral and pacifist. With the story direction that the game goes in, there are a lot of wacky things going on throughout the body of the game, which I define as everything that takes place before entering the long elevator to Asgore's house, starting all the way from the very point Sans greets you with the whoopee cushion in the hand trick. And what I like about this, while Undertale has a pretty dark theme to it, its lightheartedness in these routes makes it possible for you to develop connections with these characters that are supposed to be your enemies. In fact, this is why a pacifist run on the game is theoretically possible at all. But this is not neutral or pacifist. This is Genocide. You're not just a tiny human that fell into the underground that everyone wants to kill. No, you also want to kill, and you want to go out of your way to do it too. So the need for any lighthearted aspect of the game is gone. And as such, all of that is stripped away from us. So Flowey deactivating the puzzles doesn't just serve the purpose of being our partner in crime. It also chips away at the fun factor that helped give Undertale its perfect blend. But more importantly, the characters we've grown to know and love previously do not seem like their full selves, and interactions like the first one with Sans and Papyrus feel unfulfilled. Apart from some very, noteworthy lines, our interactions with the characters are severely limited, which, just how it should be, to those that liked in the pacifist route, is disappointing. Skipping over to the Papyrus boss fight, our result is very similar to Toria, with Papyrus going down in just one blow. However, it feels just slightly less fleshed out than it should be. With Toria, I didn't care so much about her as a character, yet her dialogue after killing her in Genocide was very poignant and disturbing. With Papyrus, we have a character that is heavily involved with the story in other routes of the game, making their death seem all the more small. I don't quite know how to put it. I will say that Papyrus's fierce dialogue before the fight was very surprising, invoking the sense of intimidation that I felt towards him at the beginning of Neutral, and his after-death dialogue, stating how he still knows you can do better, is subtly moving, showing Papyrus's positive attitude that is always undying. But of course, we all know there's something else undying waiting for us ahead. So Waterfall is much like Snowden, only now the sad, depressing theme of Snowy slowed down is replaced with this. I'm just gonna let the theme speak for itself. It definitely adds to the corrupted feel of this route of the game. Not much else is noteworthy to add here, until the interaction with none other than the Mad Dummy themselves. Now, as you may remember from the previous routes of the game, this character is actually a ghost that just lives inside a dummy, and ghosts can't be killed in this game since they're incorporeal. And back then, when I was talking about my Undertale playthrough of Neutral with the rest of the Roman numerals, I found out that the Mad Dummy really can't die, except for in the Genocide route. That got me wondering, how exactly do we gain the ability to kill them in that route? Well, it is actually surprisingly simple. Basically, the main gimmick of the Mad Dummy is that, well, they are mad. And this level of emotion is always associated with the character, up until they, as Mad Mew Mew, realize that they may need to try other emotions to become corporeal. However, here, Mad Dummy becomes so infatuated with anger and emotion towards our devastating acts towards everyone that the breaking point is reached, and they become corporeal at once. Now, as Glad Dummy, glad at us for fulfilling their dream, they allow us to simply pass through so they can spare us. But of course, now that they are corporeal, they can die, and as such they go down in one blow. Now about this one, I'm the least sure how to feel. On the one hand, I didn't get the crazy, wild explanation I anticipated, kinda like the one we have for the resurrection of Azrael Dreamer. But on the other hand, I got a simple yet genius explanation that I liked even more. But that fight with the Mad Dummy, Something about it just felt off to me. Maybe it was the anticlimactic music playing in the background, or maybe it was because they died without saying a last word. But one thing is for sure.
Shows how much he was worth.
That didn't feel very fulfilling. You're right, me from the past. That wasn't satisfying, and it wasn't supposed to be. Now, obviously, if you've played the Genocide route of Undertale, or any other route to be honest, you know what boss comes next. Undying. Or, in this specific case, Undying the Undying. I will not be talking about her fight here because, let's be honest, Undying the Undying is the most epic part of the game up to that point for Genocide. In fact, later on, I'd like to do a full-on character analysis of Undying in general, and I'll have a lot I can say about her, especially for this route of the game, which is pretty wild. But the fact of the matter is, this boss fight, while a real pain to get past, is far from disappointing. At least that's the case before we get to the other major boss of Genocide, but that's an afterthought, so let's just move on. So there we are. The fight with Undying the Undying is finally complete, and let me just say, finally being able to cross the rest of this bridge and move forward has to be one of the most rewarding feelings I've ever experienced in a video game. Not long after, we make it to Hotland, and presumably, Alpheus. And this is the character that I'm most worried to meet, because supposedly, though you never actually fight her, Alpheus commits suicide in the Genocide route of the game. Now, that might just be a theory of the game, but considering that Alpheus just watched Undying die as we fought her, I wasn't looking forward to hearing what she had to say to us. However, we don't actually meet Alpheus in this run ever. Instead, when we walk into the lab, Mettaton is there to greet us. It is then he informs us about Alpheus's plan to evacuate the monsters of the underground, revealing not only the cause as to why we never meet Alpheus, but also how in Genocide, not everyone actually dies. At least, not until the very end. Shortly after, when we reach the first elevator and travel to the second floor, we come across another source of disappointment. The second floor of Hotland is completely inaccessible. I only realized this when I tried to reach So Sorry, as I was looking forward to seeing him die. But this cutting out of a huge area of the game really emphasizes the limiting factor this game has. Rather than having to work your way up through the floors to get to floor 3, you can travel up there right away. That may seem like a godsend in Pacifist, but it cuts out a lot of the experience you would get otherwise. Not to mention, it also cuts a lot of the grinding potential for enemies, which isn't good, considering there's, count it, 40 we need to kill here. I actually think this is a genius concept of progression for the player here, but I'll discuss that in a different video. So after walking around the core and the rest of the limited space of Hotland, I ended up just spending a good portion of time only walking back and forth on this bridge right here in the core, just before the door that leads to Mettaton EX, or in this case, Mettaton Neo. And unfortunately, yes, I already knew about Mettaton Neo, and that he has the theme Power of Neo, Undertale OST 99, but I still didn't know how Neo came to be, or what the backstory behind him was, etc, etc. So I still had that going for me. But once I had gotten my final, but nobody came text, I knew what lay ahead of me. Now, in my unfortunate usurpation of Neo spoilers, one thing I learned is that Power of Neo, Mettaton Neo's boss theme, is only 30 seconds long. But I figured that probably doesn't mean too much, right? After all, Dog Song is 38 seconds long, and that's technically a boss fight theme. Maybe Toby Fox intentionally made the song so short, so hearing it repeat over and over while fighting makes the player regret Genocide more, right? No. Mettaton Neo goes down in one hit. And this is where the disappointment factor of Genocide Undertale comes full circle. This boss, Mettaton Neo, is set out and portrayed to be the huge aspect of the Genocide route of Undertale. While in Pacifist, Mettaton surprises us all with his final form, Mettaton EX. It is kept a secret the whole time that EX is not actually his final form. The sprite work for Neo is breathtaking, something unseen of. Mettaton's right eye is revealed, much like Undying's left eye in her Undying form. Even in the files of the game, Neo Mettaton is stated to have 30,000 HP, even more than Undying's mere 23,000. And of course, he has his own theme. Now, power of Neo may have been the only point of skepticism in this fight, but that's just because half the details of Undertale had been spoiled to me already, which is another video idea I have planned, by the way. To someone who hadn't seen the 30-second time mark for OST 99, they wouldn't have any skepticism at all. Mettaton Neo was fully made out to be a third one of Genocide's major bosses, but why did he go down in one hit? Simply put, Alphys forgot to work on the defenses. Yes, you heard me right. Dr. Alphys worked so hard in building the human eradication robot that Neo is, that she forgot about building his defenses. And why is that a bad thing? Because guess who gets the first attack in every boss fight? You. Neo goes down in one blow before he can even attempt to show his deadliness. So much potential of this boss is shown right in front of you, only to be stripped away, leaving the player, you guessed it, disappointed. So I have something to add here that I didn't put in my final script of the video, but after I had finished the Neo boss fight, after I finished recording episode 6, I looked up Power of Neo by a man on the internet. Really extensive list of Undertale, the musical videos that I definitely think you should check out. But I wanted to listen to it, and I did so, and there was a few details that I noticed. For one, the boss fight with Neo is actually existent because it's not actually the boss fight with Neo, it's a fan-made one. And it just goes to show you how much people wanted to see an actual fight with Neo. But the important part I want to add here is that at the end of the song, you see Mettaton Neo's dialogue that I didn't get. But basically, it's the dialogue that you get if you were to screw up Hotland, not kill all the 40 enemies before you met Neo. And I want to bring this up here because though I didn't get that, if you were one of those players and you had to find out you had to start all over from scratch to get Genocide correctly, that's another level of disappointment that is pretty unfathomable. And I know many people have probably screwed up at that point. So I just wanted to add that here because it seems like Neo was centered around the feeling of disappointment, and it might actually be the reason I wanted to create this video in the first place. Also, another thing I wanted to add here as I was editing this video, when you're playing Genocide route of Undertale, another source of disappointment with Mettaton is that you don't get to hear Death by Glamour, which, if you know Death by Glamour, it's pretty good. You might have noticed that disappointment in Genocide Undertale seems to progress as you go along, only getting worse and worse over time. Toriel's death was not very disappointing at all. Papyrus's death, apart from the fact that you killed one of the most popular characters in the game, was only disappointing because the one-hit kill was less surprising than with Toriel. The Mad Dummy's death felt minuscule, only held up by its plot twist, and the fight with Muffet was even worse. Granted, she's a bit of an enigma considering she's a fan-made character. The only exception to this pattern would be Undyne for obvious reasons, but here we have Mettaton Neo, whose death doesn't just feel unsatisfying, it feels extremely unfair. But hey, we all know there's one major boss we haven't talked about yet. Is there any way that their fight could feel any worse? Here's the thing. Once you defeat Mettaton Neo, you've basically passed the last disappointment the game has to offer. Everything after you leave this stage is quite literally the best and most memorable part of this game. As sick as it sounds, considering I killed 105 enemies to get to this point, this experience is totally worth it. However, that experience doesn't come without a cost, and that cost, you know what it is already. If there's one aspect about Undertale that literally everyone who's heard of this game knows about, it's this right here. Sans. I will stand by the Sans fight as the best part of Undertale. It was the main reason I wanted to play this game in the first place. It's home to the song that infiltrates our lives that I will still argue is the best song in the game. Don't even think about arguing. And this boss fight, unlike any other boss fight in the game, reached me on an emotional level that didn't need to do it through just dialogue. Though the dialogue through Sans' fight is still very compelling. However, this fight does still manage to feel worse than the one with Neo, despite being fully fleshed out. And you might ask, how? Well, let me just say this. If you're serious about actually achieving the Genocide ending without knowing the extent of what you're gonna get yourself into, you're gonna have a bad time. Once that whole ordeal is done though, and you successfully witness the last of the Genocide route, there's one last feeling of disappointment that the game has to offer. Now, if you're like me, or want to follow the best pattern to playing this game, you'd start with the neutral route, and then go to the pacifist route, and finish with the Genocide route. The neutral route is more or less optional, but regardless, Genocide is the most sensical to play last. So unless you're a psychopath and play a pacifist after Genocide, which goes against the intended flow of the game anyways, you've experienced basically everything Undertale has to offer. No longer do you live in a world blissfully unaware of the madness and genius behind this game, but now you live in a world where you've seen it all, and you can never experience it for the first time ever again. It's a sad reality to accept, but honestly, I'm quite relieved. Maybe that feeling is different for me since my first experiences with each route of the game are uploaded for both me and the entire world to see. But honestly, I feel like Undertale is that kind of game that needs to be played even if you can only truly feel it one time. Undertale will always hold a special place in my heart, but now I must know. I must move on to playing different games once again. At least we have Deltarune.